This broadcast, which is entitled Two Visits to Mark Twain, was first given in the BBC third programme on November 21st, 1954. It was repeated in the home service on January 1st, 1955. This recording is made from the original script. One crisp autumn morning in 1905, a very excited young man in his early 20s walked down the lower end of Fifth Avenue, New York. The young man was myself, and the reason for my excitement was that I had an appointment to meet and photograph no less a personality than Mark Twain, whose real name, as the world knows, is Samuel Langhorne Clemens. Of course, I had read Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. What imaginative boy of that period had not? And my eagerness to contact the author of these two masterpieces knew no bounds. I was to photograph him for Harper's Magazine, and to that end had been given a letter of introduction by his lifelong friend, William Dean Howells, the author, who was at that time the editor. Lower Fifth Avenue was at that time purely residential, with brownstone fronts and steps leading up to the front doors. Mark Twain's house was, I remember, number 51. I climbed the steps, rang the bell, and was then greeted by a maid, who gave me the disconcerting news that the great man was in bed. I thought I would have to go away. But no, I was invited into his bedroom, and there Mark Twain was in a wonderful carved four-poster bed, wearing a beautiful red dressing gown with a patterned silk collar, and looking with his wealth of flowing white hair the real old lion that he was. I asked Mark Twain why he had received me in bed, and his answer was characteristic of him. He said he spent much of his time in bed because he could work better and more comfortably there. If he didn't want to see anyone, they could truthfully be told that he was in bed. But if he really wanted to see them, as in my own instance, it didn't matter a bit. He could see them in bed just the same. And he said this with such a twinkle in his eyes, you could see that, like many humorists, he enjoyed his own jokes. Mark Twain was, however, more than just a great humorist. He was as well a great personality, a truly great man. Although he was over 70, on this, to me, memorable occasion of the first meeting, he did not really seem old at all. He had the gift of perpetual youth. He never seemed to have grown up. He did not so much talk with you as take you into his confidence and impart to you some of the rich experience of his life. For the moment, you were the only person in the world to him. I never like to rush headlong into making a photograph. When possible, I prefer to have a preliminary talk with my prospective sitter, and in this instance my wish was fully granted. In fact, it almost seemed that to Mark Twain time did not really greatly matter. I spoke to him enthusiastically about Tom Sawyer. I told him I had been brought up on him, and this pleased the great man as much as if he had never before been told such a thing. We had a happy time together. I made my photographs, and so ended our first meeting. It was not until 1908, 3 years later, that I had a richer opportunity of knowing and photographing this great man. My good friend Dr. Archibald Henderson, professor of mathematics at the University of North Carolina and biographer of Bernard Shaw, was engaged upon a life of Mark Twain, and he had been invited to visit him at his new home in Stormfield, at Redding, Connecticut. I also was included in the invitation, so that with my camera I might make illustrations for Henderson's book. Of course, I was delighted. Stormfield was named after the author's satire, Captain Stormfield's Visit to Heaven. It was completed only in the summer of 1908, and it was just before Christmas in that year that Henderson and I paid our visit there. I was told that Mark Twain never saw the house until it was completed and ready for occupation, with the cat purring on the hearthrug. In this he showed much discernment. The early chaotic stages of moving in are best avoided, but it also shows, I think, a curious detachment from personal surroundings. His only concern was that there should be a billiard room, billiards being a game of which he was especially fond. That December there had been snow, and on our arrival at Stormfield, the house itself, the Italian garden of pergolas and fountains, and the surrounding hills were all white after a recent fall. It was an ample house, because our host delighted to entertain. Outside it might be cold, but within there was central heating, augmented by great log fires on open hearths, and above all there was the warmth of a homely and unstinted welcome. Mark Twain, wearing a white suit, met us in the hallway as though we had been his nearest kin. I might say that it was his custom to wear white, because, as he quaintly put it, it matched his hair. The decorations and furnishings of Stormfield were, I was given to understand, largely the taste and choice of his daughter, Clara. She had recently married the eminent pianist Gabrilovich. Everything was restrained and lacking in ostentation. Plain white and delicately tinted walls, very few pictures or ornaments of any kind, severe modern furniture, very modern for those days of excessively patterned interiors. Photographically, it provided an ideal background. In the large drawing room there was a grand piano, which Gabrilovich played in the evenings. Mark Twain, I saw, was very fond of music. His daughter, who had a contralto voice, sang accompanied by her husband, and I remember how her father sat drinking in the melody with an expression of perfect content upon his face. Fine mornings, and most of them were fine, were spent in photographing. Mark Twain never seemed to tire of being photographed, both within doors and in the Italian garden, where he wore a long fur-lined overcoat with a white cap with flaps to cover his ears if required. I remember that he carried a long staff which resembled a ceremonial wand. I made a great many photographs, about 30 or 40 as far as I can remember, and a number of these appeared in Dr. Henderson's book. One I especially recall. There was a circular basin of a fountain under one of the pergolas, which was eventually to have a statue in it. At the time, the central pedestal was empty. Mark Twain said, "Why should I not be the statue?" "Why not, indeed," I answered. So he mounted the pedestal, cigar in one hand and staff in the other, and erect and dignified figure, which would have rejoiced the heart of Pygmalion. The sun shone on the background, of snow-mottled yew trees, and this made a unique picture of Mark Twain as a living statue. He was never long parted from a cigar, and in most of the photographs I made of him, a cigar is in evidence. The one in bed in the red dressing gown is an exception, for here he had a pipe. I suppose this was because he didn't wish to drop ashes on the bedclothes. In a pipe, he told me, he smoked jet-black twist, such as sailors smoke, a habit formed during his days as a Mississippi pilot. I remember asking him which was his favorite author. He said apart from the Bible and his own writings, he guessed it was Uncle Remus, by Joel Chandler Harris, a book he used to read aloud to his children when they were young. It is not difficult to imagine his doing this in the melodious dialect of Uncle Remus himself, for Mark Twain was a true Southerner. Not only was he born in Missouri, but his father originally came from Virginia and his mother from Kentucky, and never to the end of his days did he lose the soft, lilting musical accent of the southern states, acquired no doubt in his youth from a Negro mammy. In my imagination I can hear his melodious voice expounding to his little ones the surprising, not to say miraculous adventures of Brer Rabbit, of Brer Possum, and Brer Fox, and perhaps enjoying them himself most of all. In the afternoon there was often a game of pool or billiards. These were games of which Mark Twain was very fond, and at which he displayed a considerable skill. The result, as he assured me, of a misspent youth. Now there was one important fact which privately and secretly was imparted to newly arrived guests. In all the games, Mark should always win, and by the narrowest margin, so as not to be too evident. This was easy enough in my own case, because I was very incompetent, and sometimes pleaded this an excuse to just watch the others. Mark himself played with tremendous enthusiasm. He put his whole heart into his play, as if his very life depended upon the results. After an especially brilliant stroke, he explained that one of his mottos in life was that nothing succeeds like excess. To see his intensity and the determination as he leaned over the table, his face pink with enthusiasm and excitement, was to understand something of why he had succeeded in life, succeeded in making himself world famous in his own chosen field. Not long before my visit, burglars had broken into Stormfield and stolen the silver. In consequence, there was in the billiard room a framed notice conspicuously displayed, which read as follows: "To the next burglar. There is nothing but plateware in this house now, and henceforth. You will find it over in the corner by the basket of kittens. If you want the basket, put the kittens in the brass thing. Do not make a noise, it disturbs the family. You will find rubbers in the front hall by the thing which has umbrellas in it. Please close the door when you go away. Yours very truly, S.L. Clemens." The rubbers mentioned in the notice, for those unacquainted with the American language, are galoshes. As far as I've been able to discover, Mark Twain was not burgled again, perhaps because it was made too easy, or again it may have been that the plateware was not sufficiently alluring. But to revert to the games, we played cards. A game called Hearts was his favorite, and this, as in pool or billiards, it was arranged that he should win. I am quite sure that he was not aware of this little device. It was carried out with the solemnity of a ritual, and sometimes with considerable difficulty. In my own misspent youth, I was quite a proficient card player, and one evening I came near to winning, and was only rescued from this unpardonable mistake by the raised eyebrows and frequent nudges of the other players. Hearts is really rather a strange game. The whole object is to take as few tricks as possible containing cards of this suit, each heart counting a point against you. You will understand, therefore, that the poorer your hand, the better it is. Mark Twain called it a heartless game. Normally it is not very difficult or complicated. Children often play it and enjoy it. But when it is played so that one person is to win, it becomes a game requiring great skill indeed. Any number of persons from 3 to 6 may play, and Mark Twain, having an ample outlook, always preferred 6, and 6 it usually was, each and all eager and intent to lose in order to make one great boy happy. I have often pondered on this curious trait in his character, why he should so greatly enjoy winning. It was not an ordinary desire to win. It was a kind of passion. It was not that he was in his second childhood and had to be humored as such. His mind was keen and active in this and other matters, and he took a vivid interest in questions of the day, in art and politics, quite equal, if not surpassing, that of men of half his age. No, it was just that he wanted to win so eagerly that it was a positive pain for him not to do so. And the curious thing about it all was that it was actually more fun to see him win than to win oneself. I can still in memory see his beaming countenance at the end of a closely fought and triumphantly won game. I think it must have been rather the same with the end of his life. Recognition of his greatness was such fun that everyone was delighted to acknowledge it. He wore the mantle of his fame so graciously and withal so joyously that it was inevitable that he should be universally acclaimed. You will remember the famous story towards the end of his life. There was an unfounded report of his death. When it reached the author himself, he caused to be circulated the statement that the rumor was grossly exaggerated. But the end of his earthly life came not long after my last photograph, for he died as the sun sank into the west on the evening of April 21st, 1910, at Stormfield, his home. Is he dead, or do men live on in their work? I am inclined to think that they do. Wherever there are those who are young in heart, the immortal works of Mark Twain will be read and read again, and I like to remember that I have met and known and shaken by the warm hand the author of them all.